Though, I thought, I continued talking to Kevin, the bartender, without flinching or missing a beat. It had only been 6 months since my self-imposed 3-year exile that I was back in Texas. Above all, how and why did she find me? I didn't even look back or give him a nod. Just as I was about to break into a particularly vulgar joke, I felt someone's hand on my shoulder. "Hello, Mr. Watkins, I'm Rob Morgan. Finding you has not been easy." I gave Kevin a sidelong glance and arched an eyebrow. "Did you want to keep that hand, Robbie?" I turned back to Kevin and delivered the punchline as soon as I felt his hand slip from my shoulder. He walked down to the other end of the bar, still laughing, and popped another Shiner Bock for me and told me it was on the house. I cut him off, saying, "Mr. Watkins, we have business to disc. Unless you want to hire me to weld something, I have no business with you. My name isn't Watkins. If not, Mr. WH, we don't have anything to talk about." Before he hit the floor, that was all he could get out. I waved to Kevin, placed $20 on the bar, and started to walk away while rubbing my right hand. "Mr. Watkins, you're a hard man to find, and I have no intention of starting my search over again." I turned to face the taser gun he was pointing at my crotch. The tiny bitchant. It was pretty intimidating, even though he was sprawled on the floor at the moment. He wiped a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth and stood there. "I have no qualms about using it, so sit down and let's have a chat." I waved off Kevin, who was walking in our direction, with a quick glance. After pausing and nodding, he said, "Let me know if you'll need anything, Bill." "Thanks, Kevin, I will." I looked back at the hole with the taser. Who the hell packs a taser in Texas? I laughed and leaned in to give him a closer look. "Do I know you, boy?" "Screw you, Mr. Watkins. Son, you need to work on your manners. You could not have grown up in Texas. Instead of calling me Bill, would you please tell me who you are and what the devil you want?" "Is that right, Bill?" "All right, Bill, Kevin has placed a few beers on Robbie's tab and set us up. So why don't you tell me who this Watkins guy is and why you have such a big stick up your ass about him?" I asked, grinning and taking a seat in the closest booth. "All right, Bill, we'll give it your way for the time being. A prosperous and well-known businessman from Dallas named Mr. Chas Watkins vanished from sight a little more than 3 years ago. Sarah is his daughter, and he is wed to Mrs. Amy Watkins. She is 23 years old. Like I said, my name is Rob Morgan. I've been contracted to locate and bring back Chas Watkins to Dallas." "Are you serious? You say it has been 3 years, and not a trace. What connection does that have to me? I am not a successful businessman and I am not Chas Watkins, as you seem to have thought. Bill Grant is my name. I travel occasionally, play a little guitar poorly, and weld for pay. I had taken such great care before I left. I spent a great deal of money on a brand new identity. I had gained about 20 pounds of muscle and lost about 30 pounds of fat since then. I had also grown my hair and beard. Spitting on Amy would make no difference to her. If I ever saw her again, I'd have to make sure to test that. After 3 days of driving north and west after leaving Dallas, I pulled over and looked for a trailer that I could rent. I restarted my life by enrolling in a welding class at a nearby community college. I left a high-paying job, 2 houses, cars, credit cards, keys, cell phone, clothes, and a deceitful, lying wife behind in Dallas, leaving me with nothing but cash. I drove a used Ford F-150 to a music store, where I purchased a gorgeous used Martin Dreadnought, paying cash for the vehicle and registering it under my new name. Only the clothes on my back were brought with me. I always paid with cash and seldom stayed anywhere for more than 6 or 8 months at a time. I didn't own a phone or any credit cards. I did not file a tax return, worked for cash under the table, and stayed out of trouble nearly all the time. Sarah had to be the one. I couldn't fully distance myself from her. I emailed her to let her know that I was still alive, about 15 or 16 months after I ran away. To let her know that I loved her and was thinking of her, I sent her another before making any moves from a computer in the public library. I never answered any of her questions about where I was or why I had left. I also never told her. She could get that from her mother, the witch. Well, Bill, scoffed Robbie, like I mentioned, Mr. Watkins just up and vanished a little over 3 years ago, and nobody seemed to know anything about it. I think the police followed up rather casually for the first year or so, leading many people to believe he had either run off with another woman or that Mrs. Watkins had been involved in some sort of foul play. Mrs. Watkins had a challenging year on the personal, professional, and financial fronts. She had attempted to sell off some of their possessions, but she was unable to get Mr. Watkins declared legally deceased and lacked a power of attorney. She spent the money in the bank rather quickly because there weren't many new monies coming in. To help her get her husband ruled deceased, she retained legal counsel. Unfortunately for Mrs. Watkins, their daughter Sarah received an email from someone posing as Mr. Watkins approximately 16 months after her husband vanished. The daughter was obviously overjoyed, but it made declaring Mr. Watkins dead a challenging proposition. The police then closed the case, and Mrs. Watkins hired my company to locate a man named Mr. Ches Watkins, bring him back to Dallas to face fraud charges, and give her exclusive access to and control over the marital assets. The poor dear, I muttered. She seems to be in a bind. So explain to me, Robbie, how I fit into this short film intended for television. Well, Mr. Watkins, may I call you Chaz? You can call me Bill, like everyone else. I am authorized by the state of Texas to forcibly, if necessary, escort you, Ches Watkins, to the Dallas County Sheriff to answer charges of fraud and abandonment. To his chagrin, I burst out laughing. Robbie, that's a lot of food for a little guy. Although your story is endearing, what kind of fraud has been done? Why would the Dallas County Sheriff give a damn, and when did leaving an unhappy marriage in Texas turn into a criminal offense? Robbie, that dog just doesn't hunt. In my opinion, you will need to do a better job of threatening this Ches Watkins if you ever manage to track him down. I don't think he sounds foolish. I don't think there's much chance of getting him to come back to Dallas, and if he just up and left, I'm sure he had a good reason. Robbie, allow me to assist you with a little role-playing. Why ought he to return? How does it benefit him? You'll probably need to do some serious research to find the answers to those queries. I gulped down my beer after emptying the bottle. You can put your little laser pointer away now, Robbie. I retracted the Glock slide under the table. He really should give people more of his attention. He slightly paled, realizing that the 9mm was pointing at him right now, and aimed his taser gently at the location I was pointing to on the table. Robbie, let me tell you a story. I was told this story by a friend of mine, 3 years ago, I think. Are you hearing me? All right. Kevin, my man, how about a basket of wings and a few more beers? This Robbie has an expense account. So, about 3 years ago, I met this guy. Identify him as Chaz. He was married to Amy, as we shall refer to her from now on, and by a strange coincidence, they had a daughter named Sarah. I can tell you the exact moment my marriage ended, or at least the moment I realized it was doomed, according to the story my friend Chaz told me. Amy turned 50 that day. We had made up our minds to spend her 50th birthday at our rural weekend house. Only the two of us. She had never been a party animal or interested in elaborate affairs, she was a quiet woman. She had all she needed and wanted because we are a reasonably well-off family. Giving gifts to her became challenging because of this, but I was satisfied with the things I picked out for her after months of deliberation, discreetly feeling her out in conversations, and surveying her friends. It seems that she wasn't. As soon as she saw them, it was evident. Her expression briefly dropped before her forced expression of gratitude covered her face as she thanked me. I thought I knew her well, having been married for 24 years, but it was clear to me that she had expected something very different. After giving that some thought, I asked her how she truly felt. Though her smile was forced, she assured me that she was happy. When I persisted in pressing the matter, she at last admitted that the presents were not what she had anticipated and that she had hoped for something a little more. Well, she wasn't sure what precisely she had hoped for, just not these. How on earth was I going to find out if she didn't know? I expressed my regret for destroying such a significant moment in her life and assured her that I would try my hardest to make it up to her. She said I could make it up to her if I wanted to, but she was shocked that I hadn't shown her more consideration for her 50th birthday. Oh. I attempted to explain to her why I had chosen each gift, but the more I tried to explain, the more agitated she got with me. When I finally promised to make it up to her, she said, "You wouldn't have to try to make it up to me if you had given me enough thought to begin with. And how do you atone for the kind of mistake that this is? I will never again turn 50. Then she told me she wanted to return home to Dallas because she wasn't feeling well. We rode home together in silence, pissed off. We didn't get married very often. We had a relationship that was based remotely while I was away at college. She graduated 3 years ago, making her older than I am. I caught Amy cheating on me over the long weekend I spent with her. We were walking around downtown when an elderly man, who appeared to be in his 50s, approached us and gave her a tender hug. He smirked at me as he shook my hand after Amy introduced the two of us. He grinned. My father used to tell me to always exercise caution when approaching a man who had a shaky handshake, and his was no exception. I was on my guard, and I disliked him right away. "Nice to meet you, Dan. Are you a friend of Amy's father?" I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something off here. Amy was a little flustered, and he acted a little smug. While she was at work later that day, I did a little digging and found out they had been seeing each other for about a month. I found their love letters, for hell's sake. She wasn't even hiding it. We had agreed to be exclusive. When I confronted her, she of course denied it. They were only friends. I told her to screw off and left immediately. I didn't call or write her and didn't take her calls. I threw her letters in the trash without reading them. Her friends began calling, and I ignored them. Then she had my friends calling me, pleading her case. I told them all to tell her she needn't worry, that she was free to screw and marry her grandpa now. I hate being lied to. Ultimately, she came to see me, and over time managed to convince me to give her a second chance. I did, but I kept her on a very short leash for a very long time and told her in no uncertain terms that if she ever cheated on me again, we were through. 2 years later, we married. She never did admit to the cheating. After 11 years of marriage, Amy threatened to divorce me. I was drinking too much, working too much, traveling too much, and she was no longer interested in sharing her life with me. We argued. I told her that while I could not curb my travel, I could cut back on work a little and certainly would rein in my drinking. I begged her to think of her young daughter, Sarah. She eventually agreed, but I was saddled with some pretty severe restrictions, and she set about separating our finances and lives. She told me she was just preparing for the inevitable. I complained that she didn't seem to really want this to work, and she just shrugged her shoulders and left the room. I was determined, however, and over the next couple of years, she relaxed, mostly, I think, because I started making several times what she was. Actually, I paid more in taxes than she earned in a year, and separate finances only benefited me, allowing me to pursue my own interests without having to discuss things with her. I bought a couple of motorcycles, a large sailboat, took flying lessons, and bought a Cessna. I wore designer suits and drove a late-model BMW. I bought our second home in the countryside, a 50-acre weekend retreat, without any financial assistance from her. I always contributed to the household first, paid for all of the family vacations, and still, I was living a life she wanted a bigger piece of, so she relaxed. I'm not convinced that we ever really recovered from that episode. Over the years, Amy became more combative with me. She had become a shrew, and I her employee. We rarely had sex, maybe twice a year, and when we did, it was more like we were both scratching an itch. There was no intimacy, no love. I was sure she had cheated on me over the years, but I had no proof. I don't think she had any long-term affairs, just a lot of one-night stands during her travels for work. She had gotten better at cheating and hiding it. Our daughter had just left for college, and one evening, after a rather nasty and public attack on my character and attractiveness, I had had enough. I gave her an ultimatum: either we work on becoming a stronger, more loving couple with better communication and an active, fulfilling sex life, or we go our separate ways. I no longer wanted to live like people simply tolerating the presence of one another. I actually had to have her served with a petition for divorce before she agreed to talk. We argued for days, and it was the first time in years we had really communicated. She didn't want a divorce. That surprised me, and I told her so. She promised that she would recommit to our relationship and work on her part of the marriage. I was skeptical, feeling like it was my money that she really wanted, but I loved her and finally relented. So we agreed on new rules of engagement and communication and set about to fix our marriage. I took the lead and pushed her, and while she seemed content to travel this road with me, I always felt like I was driving Miss Daisy. She was in the backseat taking in the scene while I did all the heavy lifting. After a year, I told her I wanted her in the front seat with me and occasionally driving. She agreed but remained steadfastly in the back seat. She, of course, did have her own list of complaints, and I listened to those, acknowledged them, and began to try to address each of them. I loved her, and while she was rarely initiating anything to help improve our marriage, she participated in everything I suggested, and things improved. We were communicating better and having much more rewarding and frequent sex, perhaps twice a week, sometimes more. She was not as sexually adventurous as she had been early on in our marriage, but she agreed to try new things and seemed content. I relaxed. We were content, but I also knew she was holding back. Several weeks had passed since her 50th birthday, and things seemed to be increasingly cool between us. The affection was dwindling, at least on her part, and the sex began to gradually dry up. When I asked Amy about it, she blamed it on work stress and promised that when her schedule calmed down, things would return to normal. They didn't. She had always had to work long hours in the middle of projects, so at first, I didn't see anything alarming about the late nights. It did begin to dawn on me that it seemed more excessive than usual and that I was spending more weekends alone at our country home. She always had a plausible excuse, however, and I decided to just wait it out a while longer. We only had sex twice in the next 6 weeks, both times at my insistence, and both times she seemed to be simply tolerating my getting off. Immediately after one lovemaking session in which she hardly participated, she rolled over to sleep, and another time she simply left the room. Evenings and weekends, she was doing everything possible to avoid me. When that was impossible or difficult, she seemed bored at best, but more routinely simply irritated. I remembered this pattern. The SHW was back. Part of our work over the previous 2 years had been to communicate any issues we may be having before they became all-out fights. And if we did fight, we had tried to be better, more productive in our conflicts, keeping it as impersonal as we could, aiming steadfastly at a resolution, always trying to see the other side. We wouldn't tolerate cop-outs, excuses, or non-participation. We always acknowledged the agreed party's feelings and tried to address those issues only, no more deflection, avoidance, and blame. When I confronted her about her schedule, lack of affection, and our dead sex life, she didn't want to discuss it. She put me off several times over a couple of days, and when I pointed out that she was not playing by our new rules of engagement and communication, she told me to shove the rules up my bum and leave her alone. I suppressed my anger and, between clenched teeth, reminded her that we had agreed these were important and non-negotiable. She told me to screw off and go negotiate with my right hand from now on. Message received, loud and clear. Was she cheating on me? Perhaps I didn't need to know. Texas is a no-fault state, but I wanted to know. It seemed clear that our marriage was now over, and if that was the case, her cheating made little difference. But I hate being lied to, and this time she would pay for it. I had often reminded her how I felt about fidelity and honesty. I understand that you can't choose who you are attracted to, but you can choose what you decide to do about it. I told her that if she was so attracted to someone else that she couldn't resist screwing them, we would divorce first. I would be hurt, but I would respect her for respecting me enough to wait until we were divorced and being honest with me. We could part amicably, sort of, and I promised to do the same for her. I had to know for certain, and I had things to do. Before we had recombined our finances some 8 years earlier, I had siphoned some of my cash to an investment account. I had also arranged with my employer to have all of my bonuses deposited in that new account. I never told my wife about this, mostly because she wanted to control our finances, and I thought I could do a better job investing than she could. It turned out I was right, and my investment portfolio was now very healthy. One of the benefits offered by my long-term employer was tax preparation and filing services, and that was the one area my wife and I never came back together on. At her insistence 13 years ago, we had begun to file our taxes separately, and she saw no real benefit to changing that, so we didn't. I suspected she was hiding money and decided that allowed me to keep that investment account hidden from her. I had planned to surprise her with the money in our retirement, assuming we made it to retirement. In my mind, if she wasn't cheating and we divorced, I would happily split all of our assets. But if she was cheating, well, that was different. I had to figure out how to protect this money. She would not be rewarded for betrayal and dishonesty. I also had to figure out how to gain control of our joint accounts and sell our Dallas home. It was in my name only, but she loved it and tried to retain our country property. I loved that place. We had planned to retire there, and I didn't want to give it to her or have to sell it. Of course, if it looked like I couldn't save it for myself, I would force its sale before I would allow her to take it. I had paid for it, furnished it, and maintained it for 10 years. Now she simply wasn't entitled to it, as far as I was concerned. If I had to, I would give her the house in Dallas. I wanted to dump it just because she loved it so much, but I would forego that pleasure if it meant I could keep my country home. This was going to take time, and I wasn't sure that she wasn't going to simply have me served someday soon, so I got to work immediately. The first thing I had to do was see a lawyer. One of my old college buddies was a corporate lawyer here in Dallas. I called him and asked him to meet with me, and he readily agreed. We met at a roadhouse near his office that evening, and over dinner and a couple of beers, I explained my situation and asked for a referral to a family law attorney, as well as his personal and legal thoughts on my situation. His legal advice was sobering. Basically, I was screwed if I divorced her. There was no way to protect any of my assets from her, no legal means at any rate. And while Texas still had a healthy good old boy network that frowned on cheating wives, no fault meant I might get a 50-50th split with a small alimony payment to Amy no matter who did what. If she was cheating on me, then no harm no foul, give her half of everything you have and let her move her boyfriend into your house while you pay her alimony, he advised me. From a legal standpoint where it impacted the status of my marriage, do nothing. I merely blinked at him. He smiled and said, don't divorce her, change the equation. Find out if she's cheating, and if she is, screw her boyfriend, and split with whatever you can take with you. Let her pony up for a divorce and try to recover anything you take with you. He did refer me to a shark of a lawyer specialized in family law. She was the only lawyer he would be afraid of if he and his wife were to divorce. Plan B it was. Yep, the gravy train was over for Amy. She continued to avoid me, and I let her. I didn't ask about her schedule or weekends or our sex life or lack of intimacy anymore, and she seemed to take that as a victory, as if I had simply accepted the new situation. I was now spending most of my time in our country home and rarely saw her. That seemed to please her. My new divorce lawyer met with me and helped me change the beneficiaries on my will and insurance policies, etc. She also suggested I hire a private investigator because, as she said, Texas may be no fault, but there ain't nothing like a little visual, carnal evidence to nudge a negotiation in the right direction. I agreed. She recommended an ex-cop who ran an agency she had used for some time with much success, and had her AA contact him to schedule an appointment. He saw me that afternoon, and I paid for the deluxe package and had our entire life wired for sound and video. Within days, they knew the who, the when, and how long, and were working on getting the video evidence my lawyer thought might help me if it came to divorce. A week later, I sat reviewing the video evidence. I was more devastated than I thought I would be, and even Plan B faded from my thoughts. The sex didn't strike me as anything special. He was not any better endowed than I am or in better shape. He didn't have any better techniques or even get her off most of the time. She didn't do anything with him that she hadn't done with me, but her paramour took every opportunity to run me down verbally, and she participated in that enthusiastically, even suggesting they screw in my bed next time, which they did. Since I hadn't expressed any interest in sex with her for a while, they discussed how to overcome that. It was him who suggested cutting me off in the first place, but now the thought of my eating her out after he had sex with her really had him turned on, and Amy too, for that matter. This was a woman I did not know, and I wondered if I ever really had. I had a void. Being aware of your partner's infidelity and actually witnessing them cheat are two very different things. I was out of fighting spirit. I sealed the video evidence and gave it to my attorney to be kept secure, with my daughter receiving it in the event of my passing. After we graduated from our joint savings account, I paid Sarah's college tuition in full and closed my investment account. If I wasn't frugal, I could live off of my investment account balance for years at a time. And now our combined savings account was almost completely empty. After 2 weeks, I took one last look around the house, let out a sigh, and accepted my choice. My wallet, phone, and keys were on the desk in our foyer, where I usually kept them. I removed my wedding band and placed it on the pillow on my side of the bed, leaving her to ponder over it. After that, I departed. I didn't talk to anybody. I left no notes behind. I turned the corner, got into my new pickup truck, and drove off, leaving the front door open without even trying to close it. 2 weeks later, a married father of 3 who was in his 40s was viciously beaten and robbed as he exited a Motel 6. What a cheesy bastard. He wouldn't walk again, not without a noticeable limp even in the interim. His wife got a FedEx package containing a video of her husband sexing a woman who appeared to be in her early 50s, a month after the mugging. I know they got divorced a year later, and he was broke. I drove widely for 3 days after I left. To be honest, I had no real plan. One day, I happened to stop for lunch in a small town and made the decision to stay for a while. I enrolled in welding classes at a small community college after finding them. Why not? I was able to secure employment as a welder for an auto body shop after a year. I could not get a real welding job because I had only taken 1 year of welding classes. However, I discovered that most welders were not interested in the small jobs I was taking, and many people were willing to hire a guy for cash instead of a certified welder. I worked there for 4 more months, enjoying my work, and then decided it was time to move on. I traveled the nation for the next 2 years, stopping occasionally in small towns to weld something and get laid. It was the first time in years that I was having fun. I had detested my job in Dallas, the pay was great, but even though I was naturally good at it, I couldn't bring myself to wake up every morning and go to work. I carried it out for my kin. Sarah deserved it, and Amy expected it. Amy cherished the money because it allowed her to pretend like a saint while working for a non-profit organization and receiving pitiful compensation for her charitable work. In actuality, the majority of the employees at the company she worked for were the wealthy businessmen's wives who simply wanted to be seen and heard doing something. The local Who's Who rag covered all of their fundraising events, and the dresses worn by the staff were more expensive than most of their clients' annual wages from labor-intensive jobs. It was pitiful, and the majority of the proceeds were used to pay for the subsequent charity function. For the most part, they improved their own self-esteem. Because I loved my family and that was expected of me, I busted my ass in a job I detested in the interim. I made the decision to always act in my own best interests after I left. Throughout the course of those 3 years, I had sex with numerous women. Sincerely, I hoped that they enjoyed themselves as much as I did, but my motivation was selfish. I was never going to settle down, and I would just cut them loose if they got too demanding or clinging. Rather than find a friend or soulmate, my goal was to get laid. Since then, I haven't looked back, and I don't plan to. I don't care what happened to Amy, the house, or the 50 acres in the country. I can accept her choice if it makes her happy because she made her own life decisions. In my heart, I do hope the witch is broke and miserable, but I won't make any special effort to ensure that it happens. Someday, I hope to see my daughter again, but only if she swears not to tell Amy. She's finding it hard to keep that promise so far. I never give up. According to what I understand, my friend Robbie is now content. He doesn't even consider his witch of a wife, leaving behind a cheating 304 and a miserable job. How come he would return? So that he can cover her costs and allow her to deceive him once more to make him miserable. I just don't understand that at all. He's prosperous, well, and content in all the important areas. He was miserable because of his wife and their marriage. The only two positive things that came out of it, he realized when he finally gave up and woke up, were his daughter and eventually his freedom. At last, he understood that, in reality, he was the only one in the marriage. All that his wife brought was her hole. You know, he told me that even the hole she brought wasn't all that good after he left and tried a couple other women. In hindsight, he realized that she never, ever brought her game into the marriage. She spent 24 years playing him. It doesn't seem like something worth sticking around for. We are returning to the old routine of "Hey Kev, how about a couple more beers?" He told me that he thought his wife was a narcissist with a card, and that the worst thing he could do for her would be to ignore her. He didn't want her to see his suffering so she could take advantage of it and believe that she was important. That was the thing that would kill her, indifference. However, how could he be around her and not care? He came to the conclusion that by simply walking away from everything, he would be admitting to her that he didn't care about anything, not even their time together. He reasoned that even though it might take years, he would ultimately triumph when she finally faltered and failed. Robbie nodded and sighed. Bill, you're a fascinating person, and that's a compelling tale. How is your friend doing these days? I gave a shoulder shrug. Robbie, who the hell knows? Working his ass for an unappreciative, dishonest 304 in my bed is definitely not getting laid and welding something somewhere. Most likely, is he in Wisconsin? He informed me that he had always wished to visit Wisconsin. I have no doubt that he is content wherever he is and isn't looking to change anything. Say, Mrs. Watkins, why doesn't she simply file for divorce on the grounds of abandonment? She would then have control over the marital assets that she appears to desire so much, wouldn't she? It seems like a simple solution to her issue, and then you could stop annoying total strangers by searching for this Chaz guy. Bill, there are no longer any assets to seize. She attempted to file under abandonment, but by the time she got around to filing, she had already lost her job, the country property, and the house because she had attempted to have you declared dead. You remained silent. What took place? Her finances ran out. Due to her inability to sell the properties, both entered foreclosure and she was unable to pay the mortgages on her salary. An older retired couple purchased the house and Mega LLC purchased the country estate. They are a consulting company for metal arts of some sort. When it was found that Mrs. Watkins was having an affair with a married co-worker, she was fired. Wow, she sure does have a twitchy TT, don't she, Robbie? He gave a nod. Well, I sure am sorry I wasted time, Bill, but I did almost enjoy meeting you. He took out $40 from his wallet, placed it on the table, got up, and held out his hand to me. No hard feelings? I replied, none, but you should watch out for whom you offend in the future. I'm such a patient guy, you're lucky. He turned to leave, laughing. After taking about 6 steps, he stopped and said, Bill, yes, without turning around. In any case, Amy still has feelings for him. She apologizes and was hoping for his return. She is not doing well, drinks excessively, and is depressed. Robbie, women like her don't truly understand what love is. They are in love with both who they are and what other people have to offer. They cannot consider others because they are users. They deserve all the suffering they cause for themselves by abusing others because they are ugly and greedy people. She wouldn't keep taking advantage of other men if she was truly sorry. Her only regret is that she isn't being taken care of and that people might discover the truth about her. She apologizes for getting caught and the lack of money. If she genuinely apologized, she could take into account her daughter's sentiments and the fact that she is suffering because she doesn't have a relationship with her father. She might think about what she has done to her husband and decide to give him some space. She refuses to admit that she doesn't deserve him. She is the center of the universe in her twisted, sick little world, and truth, accountability, love, respect, and honesty are only relevant when they serve her interests. He turned to face me slowly. Yes, Chaz. Bob, I know Sarah loves Wisconsin, but it gets chilly there in the winter. Perhaps Mega LLC ought to move their headquarters to Rhine. I'm grateful, Bob. They really could. To be a little clearer, Chaz was the owner of Mega LLC. Sarah eventually met her father a few weeks later. For her part, Amy continues to look for her missing spouse, Chaz, or his money, whichever she finds first. Please feel free to express your opinions in the comments section, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.